I want to be completely honest with you. I used Firefox for years. Not casually, not because someone told me to, but because I genuinely believed in what it stood for. I had it installed on every machine I owned. I recommended it to people who asked me about privacy. I defended it in comment sections when others said it was dying. I had the extensions, the custom user.js tweaks, the about config modifications that took hours to figure out. Firefox was not just a browser to me, it was a statement. And then, slowly, quietly, that statement started to feel hollow, because the browser did not change overnight. Mozilla did. And that is a distinction that matters, because for a long time the product itself stayed genuinely excellent while the organization running it started making decisions that felt increasingly disconnected from the community that had kept Firefox alive through the Chrome dominance era. You probably already know what I am talking about, but I want to go through this properly, because I think a lot of people are at the exact same point I was a few months ago. Half convinced to leave, but not quite sure what they would move to, and stuck in that uncomfortable middle ground where you're still using something you no longer fully trust. Let me start with the number that tells the whole story in one sentence. In May 2025, Firefox held approximately 5.88% of global desktop browser market share. By May 2026, according to StatCounter data, that number had fallen to 3.79%. Meanwhile, Google, Chrome sits above 90% of global market share as of right now. Think about what that means. The browser that was once the great alternative, the browser that people migrated to in the millions during the Internet Explorer collapse, the browser that carried the open web standard on its back for over a decade, now exists in a margin of error. If you are a Firefox user today, you are a genuine minority on the Internet, and that minority is shrinking. Now, I want to be clear, because I do not think Firefox is a bad browser, technically. The rendering engine is solid. The extension library is still one of the deepest outside of Chrome. The developer tools are genuinely excellent, arguably better than most alternatives in specific areas. The performance, particularly after Mozilla shipped improved vertical tabs support in version 136 and made memory management improvements in early 2025, is competitive enough for everyday use. If you run a Speedometer 3.0 benchmark, Firefox scores around 34.8 on modern hardware compared to Chrome and Brave, both sitting around 37.6 and 37.7. It is slower, but not catastrophically so. That is not the reason I left. And Mozilla did try to walk it back. They issued a response saying the clause was purely functional, meant only to cover the basic operations of Firefox, like syncing bookmarks and settings across devices. They revised the language, but the damage was not in the words. It was in what the words revealed about the direction Mozilla was heading. The new CEO had publicly signaled interest in AI integration and advertising revenue. Mozilla had also been caught maintaining a partnership with a data broker called Onerep, a relationship they claimed to have ended but had not actually terminated. As Ghost Browser's analysis from March 2025 noted, if Mozilla is willing to maintain relationships that contradict its stated values, the question becomes what other compromises are being made that are not visible to users. This is where I found myself sitting, staring at a browser I had used for years, realizing that the organization behind it had quietly but consistently been eroding the exact principles I had valued it for. And I made a decision. I was going to find something better. What surprised me was how good the alternatives had become. The search I went through was not casual browsing through a listicle and picking the shiniest option. I spent weeks actually running different browsers as my daily driver, testing them in real conditions, looking at what they blocked, how they handled tracking, what their memory footprint looked like, and whether their extensions ecosystem could replace what I had built up inside Firefox. What I quickly found was that the browser landscape in 2025 and going into 2026 had evolved significantly. There were options now that simply did not exist in a mature enough form 2 or 3 years ago. The Firefox alternatives had caught up, in some cases surpassed what Mozilla was offering. And once I understood that, the decision to leave became a lot easier than I expected. The emotional attachment I had to Firefox, the sense of loyalty that kept me there longer than I should have stayed, started dissolving the moment I realized I was not giving anything up. I was gaining something. There are essentially 3 categories of browser I looked at seriously. First, the hardened Firefox forks. These are browsers built on Mozilla's Gecko engine, the same underlying technology as Firefox, but stripped of telemetry, hardened by default, and configured in ways that would take an average user hours to replicate manually in stock Firefox. LibreWolf and Mullvad browser sit in this category. Second, Chromium-based privacy browsers. These use Google's open source Blink engine, but strip out Google's data collection and add their own privacy tooling on top. Brave is the most established name here. Third, a newer category I had not taken seriously until recently, redesigned Firefox-based browsers that modernize the entire user experience while keeping the Gecko engine intact. Zen Browser is the most important name in this space right now, and it is the one that genuinely surprised me. I want to walk you through exactly what I found across each of these, why some of them failed my real-world test despite looking good on paper, and which one I actually settled on. Because that answer is not what most people in this space expect. Let me start with LibreWolf, because this is where most privacy-conscious Firefox users go first. The logic is clean and obvious. You're frustrated with Mozilla's organizational decisions, you still like the Gecko engine, you still want your Firefox extensions to work, and you want something that is hardened out of the box without spending an afternoon in about.config. LibreWolf gives you all of that. It ships with uBlock origin already installed. Telemetry is completely stripped out. The resist fingerprinting flag is enabled by default, which is something you have to manually configure in stock Firefox. It pulls its builds from Firefox stable releases, meaning you still get security patches in a reasonable time frame. On paper, LibreWolf is the perfect Firefox exit ramp for the privacy-first crowd. I ran LibreWolf as my primary browser for several weeks, and here is my honest assessment after living with it daily. It is an excellent tool for a very specific kind of user, but that user is not most people, and it might not be you. The privacy defaults are aggressive. I mean, genuinely, seriously, hit you in face aggressive in ways that interrupt normal workflows. Cookies get cleared every single time you close the browser, which sounds like a privacy win, and technically it is, but in practice, it means you're relogging into everything you use every single day. Certain web applications that rely on browser fingerprinting APIs to function, not to track you, but simply to render correctly, break silently in ways that are hard to diagnose if you are not already comfortable reading browser console errors. Streaming services gave me inconsistent results. DRM protected content, think Netflix, Disney+, anything using Widevine becomes a configuration exercise rather than something that just works. The site breakage problem with LibreWolf is real and documented. It is not a deal breaker for every user, but it is consistent enough that the community has a standing recommendation that has basically become an unofficial rule. Keep a second mainstream browser installed alongside LibreWolf for the sites that will inevitably break. When your privacy browser requires a backup browser to function as a daily driver, that is a friction point worth acknowledging honestly. I'm not saying LibreWolf is bad. I am saying it is purpose-built for users with a very specific threat model who are willing to trade convenience and compatibility for maximum telemetry elimination. If you are that person, LibreWolf is arguably the best option available that does not route all your traffic through Tor. But if you are someone who wants strong privacy defaults without constantly troubleshooting why a web app stopped working, LibreWolf will frustrate you within the first week. There's also a maintenance reality that does not get discussed enough. LibreWolf is a community project. It does not have Mozilla's engineering resources behind it. Update timing can lag behind upstream Firefox, which in the context of browser security patches is a meaningful consideration. The documentation is thinner than what you get from a major browser vendor. The sync story is workable but requires more setup. These are not criticisms of the project. The people working on it are doing excellent work voluntarily, but they are real constraints you should factor into a daily driver decision. But Brave has a problem that I could not get past, and it is not actually the crypto. Let me explain. Yes, Brave ships with the BAT rewards system, the built-in crypto wallet, Brave Talk, Brave News, and in 2026 they announced an entire roadmap called BAT Roadmap 4.0 that includes agentic payments, a stablecoin, protocol, and an integrated creator contribution system. You can disable most of this. The core privacy protections are completely independent of whether you engage with any of the crypto features. Turning off rewards and hiding the wallet does not degrade your browsing privacy in any meaningful way. So the crypto stuff, while visually cluttered in the default interface, is technically not the problem. The problem I had with Brave is architectural. Brave is Chromium at its foundation. That means Google's open source Blink rendering engine is what is actually drawing every web page you visit. Brave's team works to strip out Google's telemetry from the Chromium codebase, and they do a genuinely thorough job of it, but you are still running a browser built on infrastructure Google controls and actively develops. Every Chromium update introduces new capabilities and sometimes new tracking vectors that Brave has to audit and remove. You are in a permanent game of catch-up against a company with vastly more engineering resources. And more fundamentally, using a Chromium browser contributes to the continued dominance of Google's rendering engine across the web, which has its own long-term implications for web standards and the health of the open web ecosystem. That reasoning might sound abstract, But after spending time in privacy communities discussing it, I found it genuinely persuasive. I did not want to be part of the Chromium monoculture, even wrapped in Brave's privacy layer. And that was the moment the decision became clear. Neither LibreWolf nor Brave was giving me what I actually needed. I needed something with the Gecko engine intact, which kept me in the non-Google rendering ecosystem. I needed modern UI and workflow features that did not feel like I was using 2019 software. I needed strong privacy defaults without the daily friction of site breakage. And I needed it to feel like a browser that was designed for how people actually work in 2025 and 2026, not a power user tool that required configuration before it became useful. That is when I started looking seriously at Zen Browser, and what I found there genuinely changed my expectations for what a browser could be. I want to be upfront about something. When I first heard about Zen Browser, I dismissed it. I had been through enough exciting new browser cycles to be genuinely skeptical of anything that launched with aesthetic praise and a Discord community. Arc Browser had come and gone. Helium looked interesting and then stalled. Waterfox had been around for years, but never felt like a real step forward. So when people in privacy forums and Linux communities started mentioning Zen Browser with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for something that had earned it, my instinct was to wait. I gave it 3 more weeks with LibreWolf and Brave, collected my honest impressions, and then finally downloaded Zen. Within 48 hours, I had made it my default browser on every machine I own. That is not something I say casually. The interface is the first shock. Zen ships with a vertical tab sidebar by default. Not bolted on vertical tabs like Firefox eventually added in version 136 after years of community requests, but a properly designed sidebar that is the actual organizing principle of the browser. Your tabs live on the left. The browsing area fills the remaining space cleanly. There's no horizontal tab strip cluttering the top of your window. The result is a browser that feels wider on the same screen because you have reclaimed the horizontal real estate that a tab bar was consuming. On a widescreen monitor, this matters considerably. On a laptop, it matters even more. But the vertical tabs are just the beginning. The feature that genuinely changed how I work day to day is Workspaces. Zen implements isolated workspaces in a way that Firefox has never properly offered. In stock, Firefox, the closest equivalent is tab groups combined with separate profiles, and getting those two things to work in a coherent, non-disruptive way requires configuration and workarounds. In Zen, workspaces are a first-class feature. You create a workspace for each context, one for work, one for personal browsing, one for research, one for whatever separates your browsing contexts, and those workspaces are genuinely isolated. Tabs do not bleed between them visually or contextually. You can assign separate themes to each workspace, so there is a visual signal for which context you are in. Switching between them takes a single click. You can have 20 tabs open across 4 workspaces, and your browser does not feel cluttered, because each workspace shows you only what belongs to it. Then there is Glance. This is the feature I did not know I needed until I started using it. Glance lets you preview any link in a floating window without leaving your current tab. You hover over a link, trigger Glance, and a preview window appears over your current page. You read what you need, close it, and you're exactly where you were. No new tab opened, no history polluted, no back button navigation. For research workflows, for reading articles while staying on a reference page, for checking links without losing your place, Glance removes an enormous amount of navigational friction. I had been dealing with that friction in every browser I had ever used without having a name for it until Zen eliminated it. The privacy story in Zen follows directly from Firefox's foundation. Because it runs on Gecko and pulls from Firefox's codebase, the enhanced tracking protection system works exactly as it does in Firefox. You get the same extension ecosystem, which means uBlock origin, which is still the gold standard for content blocking, and which Manifest v3 has been steadily undermining in Chromium browsers, works at full capability in Zen just as it does in Firefox. That is not a small point. Google's Manifest v3 extension standard, which Chromium browsers, including Brave, are required to implement, places limits on how extensions can intercept network requests, which materially reduces what content blockers can block in Chromium-based browsers. On Gecko, this constraint does not apply. uBlock origin in Zen operates at the full power it was designed for. Zen's update cadence has also accelerated significantly. In March 2026, the team shipped an update introducing live folders, brought the browser's core up to Firefox 148, and delivered notable Linux performance improvements. In January 2026, they shipped window syncing and session recovery. The release notes tell you something important about the project's momentum. This is not a browser that had a flashy launch and then slowed to maintenance mode. The team is shipping meaningful feature updates consistently, and the open source community contributing to the project is large enough that the development velocity feels sustainable. The customization depth in Zen is also genuinely unlike anything else I have used. Zen Mods, the browser's theming and customization system, allows you to reshape the interface in ways that go well beyond what Firefox's theme system supports. Color schemes, layout adjustments, accent colors, compact mode for users who want maximum browsing area, all of it is accessible without touching configuration files. The onboarding experience when you first install Zen is itself a statement about what the browser values. You spend real time during setup choosing how the browser looks and feels before you ever open a web page. That is a design decision that tells you the team understands that the browsing environment matters as much as the browsing engine. So let me tell you exactly where I landed, and why the answer is not as simple as just saying Zen Browser and calling it done. Because the honest version of this story involves a decision I made that most browser reviews do not talk about, which is that the right answer for a lot of people is not one browser. It is two. And understanding why I reached that conclusion will probably help you figure out what your own setup should look like, because your situation and threat model are different from mine. And a blanket recommendation without context is just noise. Here's what I actually run today. Zen Browser is my daily driver for everything. General research, content consumption, work sessions, organized across workspaces, anything where I need the modern interface and the workflow features that Zen has built. I have my workspaces configured, my extensions installed, my glance preview active, and within about a week of daily use, the browser stopped feeling new and started feeling like a natural extension of how I think about organizing information. That transition from conscious tool to invisible habit is the real test of whether a browser has earned its place, and Zen passed it. I also keep LibreWolf installed for the rare occasions when I need maximum privacy isolation for something sensitive, the kind of session where I want cookies cleared on exit, fingerprinting resistance at its hardest, and zero chance that anything persists. Two browsers, two purposes, zero compromise on either end. That should concern you regardless of which browser you personally use. The web's long-term health depends on having more than one viable rendering engine. Right now we have Gecko, which powers Firefox and everything built on it, including Zen Browser and LibreWolf. We have Blink, which powers Chrome, Brave, Edge, Opera, Vivaldi, and essentially every other significant browser. And we have WebKit, which powers Safari and is largely restricted to Apple's ecosystem. Three engines, but in practice, Blink has so much dominance that web developers already treat Chrome compatibility as the minimum standard, and everything else is bonus. Mozilla's decline is not just a Firefox user problem, it is a structural problem for anyone who cares about how the internet functions 10 years from now. There is a glimmer of genuine hope on the longer horizon. The Ladybird browser project, a completely new browser being built from scratch with its own original engine that shares no code with Blink, WebKit, or Gecko, has been making steady progress. It is backed by a non-profit, accepts no search deals, collects no user data, and is funded entirely through donations and sponsorships. A first alpha release targeting Linux and macOS is planned for 2026, aimed at developers and early adopters. It is nowhere near ready to replace a daily driver browser, but its existence matters. The fact that a serious group of engineers is attempting to build a fourth major browser engine from the ground up in 2025 and 2026, with no corporate backing and no monetization pressure, is the most encouraging development in the browser space in years. Ladybird will not save Firefox, but it might eventually offer something Firefox could not, a browser engine with no corporate allegiance whatsoever. If you're coming from Chrome, and your primary concern is getting out of Google's ecosystem, but you want the familiarity of a Chromium interface while you transition, Brave is a legitimate step forward. It is genuinely private compared to Chrome, the Shield system works, and the BAT and crypto features are ignorable. Just go into settings on day one, disable Brave rewards, turn off the wallet display, and you have a clean, fast browser with serious tracker blocking. It is not where I landed because the Chromium engine architecture mattered to me personally, but I understand why millions of people choose it, and I do not think they are making a wrong decision. What I cannot recommend anymore, and I say this to having defended it for longer than I probably should have, is staying on stock Firefox in 2026 without at least seriously evaluating your alternatives. The terms of use controversy in February 2025 was not the end of the world. Mozilla clarified the language, walked back the worst implications, and the browser continued functioning exactly as it had. But that moment pulled back a curtain on an organization that has been losing its way for years, one that is financially dependent on the company whose browser dominates the market, one that is chasing AI integration and advertising revenue at the expense of the clarity of vision that made Firefox worth defending in the first place. The product itself is still technically competent. The stewardship of it is not. The web deserves better than one dominant engine. Your privacy deserves better than an organization that licenses your data in the fine print of a terms update. And You deserve a browser that was designed to actually work the way you think, not the way a browser worked in 2015. I made my choice. Now you have everything you need to make yours. If this broke down the browser question in a way that actually helped you, hit the like button and subscribe, because this channel goes deep on exactly these kinds of decisions. Privacy, tech, the tools that actually matter. Drop your current browser in the comments below. I want to know where you are starting from, and I will read every single one.